This content is not suitable for children and may contain depictions of violence.
Hi Islanders, tonight we have not only a case involving a brutal attack on a spouse, but it would also uncover a link to another horrific crime. And this crime was murder. But first, thank you all for your best wishes in the last week or so in regards to my marriage to the lovely Kate. But let's get stuck into this case now. Research tonight is from hour.com, Court Records, Murderpedia, findagrave.com, Killer Women with Piers Morgan, Snapped, and the Journal News. Okay, tonight we go to the state of New York and Connecticut in the US of A, around the turn of the millennium. It's here that husband and wife Sheila Davalloo and Paul Christos lived in their Pleasantville, New York condo. Sheila, born May the 11th, 1969, had immigrated from Iran at the early age with her family sometime in the 70s. She was attractive and quite smart, going to the State University of New York at Stony Brook, where she earned a biochemistry degree. She would go on to marry a family friend, Farid Musavi. She then attended graduate school at New York Medical College in Valhalla, New York, where she completed a master's degree in public health. It's here that she met the handsome and equally smart Paul Christos, born on the 3rd of March 1967. He would graduate and become a medical school teacher. Sheila and Paul would end up dating. Now, I can't say that Paul knew Sheila was married at the time, but my suspicions are that he had no idea. Eventually, Sheila's husband Farid found out about the affair and filed for divorce in 1999. Now, culturally and maybe religiously, divorce was frowned upon by Sheila's family. It brought shame upon them, and it was just not the thing to do. But Farid wasn't going to put up with his wife having an affair, so he divorced Sheila. This then led to Paul Christos and Sheila getting married in May 2000. Sheila was working at Purdue Pharmaceuticals at the time on a very high salary. And if you've watched The Pharmacist on Netflix, you know they are a massive pharmaceutical company. Paul, he was biostatistician at Cornell Medical College in New York. With its long commute, I'll get that out, the couple didn't have a lot of time to spend together. This did strain the relationship a little, and then one day, Sheila announced to Paul that her schizophrenic brother Shaheen was coming to visit. Now, Sheila told Paul that her brother had no idea she was married, and if he found out she was married and living with her partner, this would send him off the deep end. So she asked Paul if he could not only leave the home while her brother visited, but if he could take all his stuff with him so as not to leave any trace that a man was living with her, as that might set him off. Now, even though Paul had been married to Sheila for a while, he still hadn't met her brother, but he had some understanding that he was emotional and easily upset. So Paul obliged and moved his stuff out while Sheila's brother came to visit. Now, to me, that's a bit weird, I don't know. Maybe Paul was just a really understanding kind of guy, willing to do anything for his wife and her family. Don't know. So Paul would end up staying with friends or family while giving his wife time to be with her brother. I suppose he hoped she could break the news to her brother slowly, and this would just be a temporary thing. These visits started to get more frequent, and this started to piss Paul off. Now, we get into some court records. Now, I do edit this just for the flow. Now, throughout this time, Sheila had been gossiping to Paul about this love triangle that was going on at work between her friend Melissa and two other co-workers, Annalisa and a guy named Jack. Sheila told Paul intimate details about Melissa and Jack, including that Melissa was upset when Jack rebuffed her sexual advances. Sheila also told him that Melissa had discovered Jack's travel plans and had flown to Jack's destination. She then conveniently ran into him at the airport as he was boarding a plane home and sat next to him on the return flight. Sheila constantly asked Paul for advice on behalf of Melissa with questions such as why Jack was in a relationship with two women and why Jack was cheating on one woman with the other. Paul listened to these stories to humour his gossiping wife. Eventually, Sheila told Paul that she wanted to go on a stakeout with Melissa in order to spy on Jack. Although Paul thought the proposed surveillance was a little odd, he didn't think she'd actually do it. He gave her a pair of night vision binoculars. Who's got night vision binoculars? Anyway, he gave her his pair of night vision binoculars, and then Sheila told Paul that she'd purchased a lockpick set for Melissa because Melissa wanted to break into Annalisa's apartment to look at photographs in order to get a sense of the relationship between Jack and Annalisa. Sheila then practiced with the lockpick set on the front door of their Pleasantville condo. Sheila also asked Paul for a listening device that she knew he owned that Melissa could plant in Jack's office and they could listen in on his conversations. This Paul has got night vision goggles, listening devices, I don't know. Anyway, early one morning, Sheila telephoned Paul to inform him that she and Melissa were outside Annalisa's apartment and asked him if Melissa should confront Annalisa. Paul told her that Annalisa had a right to know her boyfriend's cheating on her. Soon, Paul became sick of all this love triangle bullshit and he started getting the shits with Sheila as she was constantly talking about it. Sheila also told the love triangle story to Emilio Mai and Tammy Mai, friends of Sheila and Paul. She also told it to Paul's parents and to one or two other friends as well. Sheila told Tammy about Melissa almost every time they spoke and would ask her questions such as whether she thought Jack would break up with Annalisa and date Melissa. And Sheila told Tammy that Melissa had access to Jack's voicemail and would listen to it on a daily basis to see if we were still seeing Annalisa or any other woman. This really is creepy stalker stuff. Anyway, she also told Tammy that Jack tried to set Melissa up with one of his friends, but that it didn't go well because Melissa just wanted to be with Jack. Sheila quite a few times asked Tammy if Melissa should confront Annalisa to let her know that Melissa was also seeing Jack. Tammy advised against this confrontation, but sensed that Sheila wanted to say that Melissa should confront Annalisa. Fuck's sake. Anyway, Tammy's saying don't confront her. Her husband Paul's saying, yeah, do it. I don't know. Now, as part of his work, on November the 13th, 2002, Paul had a meeting with reps from Pharmacia. Now that's where Annalisa had worked. The reps mentioned that a colleague of theirs had been recently murdered. Although a name was not mentioned, Paul began to wonder if Melissa did something to Annalisa. Paul mentioned to Sheila that an employee at Pharmacia had been killed and asked whether Melissa was involved and if Annalisa was okay. Sheila did not seem shocked or surprised and responded without elaboration that Annalisa was fine. In late 2002, Sheila told Paul that Jack and Annalisa had broken up and that Melissa and Jack were together exclusively. But also in late 2002, Sheila asked Paul for information about fingerprints and DNA. On December the 8th, 2002, during dinner, Sheila also asked Emilio Mai and Tammy Mai about DNA and fingerprints and questioned whether they have everybody's DNA on file. In early 2003, Tammy noticed that although Sheila continued to talk about Jack and Melissa, she'd not spoken about Annalisa in a while. Now, Tammy asked Sheila about Annalisa, and she responded that Jack and Melissa were a happy couple. Annalisa had moved to New Jersey because she had a new job there. I mean, this is real days of your life stuff. You can see how the afternoon soaps are so popular, or were popular anyway. All of what I just told you, Sheila's soap opera, well, its relevance will become clear soon enough. But let's get back to Paul and Sheila's relationship. Paul still loves Sheila dearly, even though there was the issue with having to constantly be away from the house because of Sheila's brother. And this is where we get to the night of March 23rd, 2003. Sheila asked Paul if he wanted to play a little game where one would be handcuffed and blindfolded, then the other would touch them with objects that they'd have to work out what they were. Paul, well, he thought this was a good chance to have a bit of fun, to try to spend some quality time with his wife and hopefully repair their strained marriage. Sheila volunteered to be first to be handcuffed and blindfolded, with Paul touching her with multiple items while Sheila guessed what they were. It was then Paul's turn. He lay on the floor, blindfolded and handcuffed to the chair. Well, I don't know if it was the first object that Paul had to guess, but he soon felt a heavy weight on his chest while Sheila was straddling him. And then she stabbed him with a knife. In the confusion and the pain, Paul screamed. Sheila said it was an accident, and then Paul felt a second sharp pain to his chest as Sheila stabbed him again. Paul then screamed for her to uncuff him, but she told him she couldn't find the keys. Sheila took off his blindfold and Paul could see blood pouring down his shirt. He again screamed for her to find the keys and uncuff him and call 911. Sheila grabbed her phone, went out of the room, and when she returned, she told Paul that an ambulance was on its way. 30 minutes later, when no one turned up, Paul begged her to call again. Sheila told him that they said they were busy and would attend when they could. God. Paul then asked if she could drive him to the hospital instead, but Sheila had a better idea. She would go to the local clinic and get a doctor from there. Paul was now losing a lot of blood and getting weaker. He was still handcuffed. Sheila walked out of the house and returned about 5 minutes later telling Paul the clinic was closed. Paul then insisted that she take him to the emergency room at the hospital. Sheila then miraculously found the keys to the handcuffs, unlocks them, and puts Paul in the back seat of their car and drives off to the Westchester Medical Centre. Now, rather than stop out the front of the emergency entrance, she drives past and goes around the back to the car park. She then opens the back door. Paul is at this stage very weak and has lost a lot of blood. Instead of helping Paul out of the car and into the hospital, she reaches into the back seat and she stabs him a third time. And this time she stabs him in the heart. Paul screams, "She's trying to kill me," several times and is able to get out of the car. Bystanders hear this and race over to help him. Paul's able to snatch the knife off Sheila and throws it aside where it falls between a pile of rocks and Sheila can't get to it. Sheila then jumps back in the car and drives off as the Good Samaritans call 911 for help. Before police and ambulances get there, Sheila returns, gets out of a car in a panic and tries to get Paul back into the rear seat. The bystanders are able to fend her off and police turn up and arrest her. Paul's taken into the emergency room while Sheila is taken downtown. Now at this stage, she's sure he's going to die. While in the interview room, Sheila tries to make out that Paul had come home with stab wounds and that she had no idea how he got them. Police interviewers didn't let on that Paul had survived and had already told them that Sheila had stabbed him twice at the condo and then once again in the car park. He told them everything before he went into surgery. Now, the coppers, they had to let her think that he was probably not going to make it, and then they dropped the bombshell on her that he'd told them everything. Sheila then struggles to make up a new story, then tells police that they were just playing a game, and then at one stage, Paul sat up, and that's how he got stabbed. Then in shock, he sat up again, causing the second stab wound, and then in the resulting struggle, he managed to get stabbed a third time. She then told them she called 911, but after no one came, she decided to drive him to the emergency room herself. In fact, during the interview, Sheila was more worried about her dogs at home being unattended than the condition of her husband. Now, true crime True Crime Islanders and all you true crime people, this is always a dead giveaway, as I'm sure all of you know. So the cops have her phone and they check her call records and there was no 911 call made. They formally arrested her and charged her with aggravated assault. Now, Paul survived the attack. Luckily, the third stab wound only nicked his heart and he would eventually make a full recovery. But that's only the start of this twisted tale. When police interviewed Paul after his operation, he told them that his marriage had become strained of late, especially after Sheila's brother had been visiting recently. He told them that her brother was mentally ill, didn't know that she was married, and that he had to leave and take all his stuff with him and hide the rest of it every time this brother stayed over. Paul told him that this was so the brother wouldn't go crazy. Now, I can imagine the police on hearing this. They're probably looking at each other like, yeah, right. On checking her phone records, they saw that there was one call at the time of the initial attack. It wasn't to 911 as Sheila had told them. It was to a contact in her phone named Nelson. On a hunch, they called Sheila's workplace, Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and casually asked the receptionist that they had just been speaking to a Nelson guy and they were trying to contact him over a business deal. They were able to get Nelson's last name, Nelson Sessler. Well, I suppose the cops thought that if she was having an affair, it would probably be a co-worker. So instead of calling 911 after the initial stabbing, she called Nelson. They brought him in, and this is where things get a little bit freaky. Now, Nelson doesn't live in the state of New York, he lives in Connecticut. And so the cops organised for him to be interviewed at Stanford Cop Shop. He told them that he'd been dating Sheila on and off for about a year. And when they told him that she'd just been arrested for stabbing her husband, Nelson was shocked. He had no idea she was married. He went on to say that he'd started dating her in early 2002 and had broken it off a few months later as he'd found a new workplace lover, Annalisa Raimondo. Now, does that name ring a bell? So let's go back in time to 2000 and talk a bit about this Nelson Sessler and Annalisa Raimondo. As I said before, Sheila and Nelson worked together at Purdue Pharmaceuticals and started a relationship. Annalisa Raimondo also worked there at the time. Annalisa was born 11th of September 1970. Her parents were both talented doctors. A gifted student, she earned an undergraduate degree from Harvard University and went to Columbia University for a master's degree. In late 2000, Nelson met Annalisa at an after-work happy hour, and in the summer of 2001, Nelson met Sheila for the first time at another after-work happy hour. This is a happy place to work. Sheila told Nelson that she was divorced, although she was still married to Paul Christos. Nelson began separate sexual relationships with both Sheila and Annalisa. In 2002, Nelson broke off his relationship with Sheila and started dating Annalisa Raimondo exclusively. Now, Sheila didn't take the breakup well at all, especially with Nelson dating Annalisa. Annalisa then left Purdue to go and work at Pharmacia, and soon her and Nelson would get engaged. Nelson still had his own place in Stanford, but spent most of his time at Annalisa's place at 123 Harbour Drive, apartment 105, and that was also in Stanford. Now I'll read from court records here, and again, I will edit it for flow. A few minutes after noon on November the 8th, 2002, the Stanford Police Department received a 911 call in which the caller reported that a man was assaulting someone at 123 Harbourview, apartment 105. The caller claimed to be a neighbour. Now, part of the call is as follows. I think a guy has attacked my neighbour. I saw a guy go into her apartment. When asked what the name of her neighbour was, the caller said, I don't know her name, but the guy was there and attacked her. I heard yelling. The dispatcher knew that Harbourview was a commercial area without apartments and knew the given address had to be incorrect. After the caller hung up, the dispatcher called back the number and discovered that the call had come from a payphone at a Duchess restaurant on Shippen Avenue in Stamford. The dispatcher telephoned the Duchess restaurant and spoke to a manager who'd not noticed anyone at the payphone. The dispatcher sent officers to 123 Harbour Drive, apartment 105, which she knew was a residential facility near the Duchess restaurant. An officer knocked on the door of apartment 105 and received no answer. He pushed the door open and saw the deceased victim, Anna Lisa Raimondo, on the floor of the front foyer. The officer saw no signs of forced entry, burglary or ransacking. Annalisa had died from multiple stab wounds and a cranial injury. The crime scene indicated a violent struggle had gone on for quite a while, as furniture was overturned, plants knocked over, and blood was everywhere. The place was an absolute mess. Forensic examiners would find blood on a sink handle in the bathroom, and this was taken for DNA testing. This blood looked like it had attempted to be cleaned up after the murder, maybe to clean the weapon or the attacker cleaned themselves. Now, it could be assumed that this blood was fresh because of the way Annalisa kept things clean and the sink was non-porous. Any old blood probably would have been washed away. It was obvious that Annalisa had put up a fight. Now, she was small but extremely fit. On the ground amongst the bloodstains was a dumbbell, although police were not sure if it had been used as a weapon at this stage. The knife used by the assailant was never found. One of the detectives investigating the murder described it as violent, brutal rage. When Nelson returned after work to Annalisa's apartment, police officers questioned him. Now, Nelson gave officers the name of two other women he dated who suffered from mental illnesses. He did not at that time tell police officers about his overlapping sexual relationships with Annalisa and Sheila. After several hours of questioning, the police released him. The police were unaware at this point of any connection between Sheila and the crime. Another thing of note is that when Nelson did arrive at the apartment, after he initially saw what was going on, he went off and sat by himself in a boat shed. Now, Nelson would become a prime suspect, as those, as we know, that are close to the victims usually are. The state medical examiner performed an autopsy and ruled multiple stab wounds to the upper body and blunt force trauma to the head as the cause of death. Nelson at this stage, like I said, he's a prime suspect, and with that comes the inevitable shunning by friends and colleagues. I mean, you've got to think this is a bit of human nature. He would have had his face all over the news and people jump to conclusions. Even if you're innocent, even if you are innocent, mud will stick. But there was one friend he could count on. That was Sheila Davalloo. She sent him a care package, consoled him, and was one of the few people willing to talk to him about Annalisa at a time when most people found it awkward. In January 2003, Sheila invited Nelson to go on a group ski trip. The group turned out to only be her and Nelson. He again started shagging Sheila and she would invite him to her condo, but again, only after having first told hubby Paul that her mentally ill brother was visiting. Now, anyone's spidey senses starting to tingle? So the trail goes cold on the murder of Annalisa Raimondo. Nelson is cleared of any involvement as he's got a rock-solid alibi. Now we're back to the stabbing of Paul Christos in March 2003. So he's been stabbed several times by Sheila, twice in the house. He asked for her to call 911, and after no first responders turned up, he pleads with her to take him to the hospital. She does this, but then drives past the emergency room entrance to a car park where he gets out of the car and she stabs him again. She drives off, then comes back to try and get him back in the car, but bystanders restrained her and police show up and arrest her. When police go to Paul and Sheila's condo to do initial investigations, Who do you think shows up? But Nelson Sessler. He finds police officers searching the residence. They informed him that there'd been a domestic dispute and that Paul Christos was in hospital. Now, it didn't click straight away that Paul Christos was Sheila's husband, so he had no idea she was married. Later, after reading an article in a newspaper about the stabbing, Nelson contacted the Stamford police and informed them that they should consider Sheila to be a suspect in the death of Annalisa Raimondo. Eventually, Nelson told officers about his concurrent affairs with Sheila and Annalisa. He tells police that Sheila had called him to come over that night. When they check Sheila's call records, they find that after she stabbed Paul in the condo, the phone call she made at the time was not the 911, but the Nelson, inviting him over for a date at around 8:30 p.m. I mean, what the fuck? So it's not long before investigators start to wonder if there's a love triangle going on here. February the 4th, 2004, charged with assault, criminal possession of a weapon and attempted murder of Paul Christos, Sheila went to trial. Prosecution said that Sheila's motive was to kill her husband to avoid the shame that a second divorce would bring to her and her family. Her defence says it was all just an accident during a sex game and that she was depressed at the time and didn't know what she was doing. Now, the problem is that phone records showed that she called her lover Nelson rather than 911 at the time. Her initial story that Paul came home already stabbed and bleeding, now that may have worked if Paul died, but he was able to tell his side of the story. Now, Paul testified that he still loved Sheila and wanted her to get help rather than go to prison. I mean, he sounds like a really decent bloke, this Paul. On February the 19th, the judge found Sheila guilty, and by the way, it was a judge-only trial without a jury. So Sheila Davalloo was found guilty of attempted murder and got 25 years without parole. Of course, Paul divorced Sheila after her conviction. And now, while all this was going on, the police and investigators still had Sheila as their prime suspect in the murder of Annalisa Raimondo. Now, as she was locked up, they had plenty of time to gather evidence and go after her. They found that Sheila's DNA was found at the scene. It was on a handle at the sink in the bathroom. And now, often when a knife is used in an attack, the attacker will also get cut and bleed. If there's a struggle, then the blood can end up splattered everywhere. And in this case, Sheila's DNA profile from blood samples taken from the sink matched within a degree of billions. As Anna Marie was a fastidious cleaner, the blood sample taken had to be reasonably fresh. Sheila had cut her thumb that day, as witnessed by her husband Paul, but she said it was from opening a can of dog food. Sheila was absent from work at the time of the murder as well. Now, she'd gone into work and had left later in the morning, and that gave her plenty of time to drive to Annalisa's apartment and commit the crime. Sheila told police she'd gone home to do a bit of work, as she often did. Now, this was backed up by her husband, Paul, as he said she'd often go home early from work and sometimes take a walk. Sheila, however, was unable to provide witnesses to her being at home or walking near her home at the time of Annalisa's murder. Sheila was charged with the murder of Annalisa, and she decided to defend herself. Now, this is a typical narcissistic thing to do, thinking that she could defend herself better than a lawyer. Now, actually, I reckon she thought she could react on the fly to any evidence or testimony against her by defending herself, rather than having to rely on a lawyer that she has probably told a bunch of lies to. Now, other than the DNA, which I guess can be circumstantial, most of the evidence was circumstantial. The jury heard of the love triangle story that Sheila would tell her husband and friends between Melissa, Jack and Annalisa, which made more sense now, as Sheila was actually describing herself as Melissa, Nelson was Jack, and Annalisa, well, was Annalisa Raimondo. And after Annalisa was murdered, Sheila would often ask these people about DNA and fingerprints. The jury heard the 911 call at the start of the trial. Now, because Sheila defended herself, she spoke at length during her trial. Now, when the jury requested the 911 call again later during deliberations, they realised that the voice on the 911 call was no one other than Sheila Davalloo herself. In 2012, she would be found guilty of the murder of Annalisa Raimondo, and she'd get 50 years to be served after she completes the 25 years she got for the attempted murder of her husband. So that was a total of 75 years. Now, Piers Morgan recently did an interview with Sheila. She still can't take responsibility for her actions and maintains she's innocent. Well, mainly innocent. She says she wasn't at the murder scene and that the prosecutors got it wrong. Sheila says she was shopping at the time and she has court records to prove it. Now, how her DNA got in the sink, she can't explain. Now, this show is currently on Netflix in a series called Killer Women. You should check it out, as some of her police interviews as well are on there. She comes up with some real bullshit, but you can make up your own mind on that. So, Islanders, Sheila thought she was smarter than the detectives. Now, where she slipped up and got caught in the attempted murder of her husband was that he didn't die, and he was able to tell his side of the story. So the initial stabbing could have been seen as accidental or happened before he got home, but the second stabbing in the car park of the hospital, that really sealed her fate. With the murder of Annalisa Raimondo, she left her DNA at the scene and made a 911 call after the attack. Now, of course, they did voice analysis on there, not just think it sounded like her, and it would prove to probably be her voice. Then when the jury heard that call a second time during deliberations, now this is after hearing Sheila's voice throughout the trial, they were sure and they believed it was Sheila that made that call. Now, the sad part of all of this is that Annalisa Raimondo, well, she was a totally innocent party to all the cheating and bullshit that went on, but she paid for it with her life. Nelson, well, I wonder if it made him think twice about being the office stud. Now, I don't know if that's the word to use, but I think he thought he was. Now, at least Sheila won't be getting out of prison in a hurry. Well, that's it for this week. What a crazy story. Feel free to comment down below. If you want to check out my audio podcast, where I have over 100 cases, you'll find it on truecrimeisland.com or your usual podcatcher like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play and Stitcher. If you've enjoyed the show, you can like and subscribe and share it, please. Let's try and get this first 1,000 subscriber count. So see you next episode. Good night, and as I always say, don't forget to delete your browser history. Boom vakalanga.